The bank's automatic doors hissed open, and Cassandra Moore stepped inside, heels clicking against the polished marble floor. A Friday morning, crowded, fluorescent lights harsh against her skin. She adjusted her blazer, aware of the stares that lingered longer than they should. She was used to it. Black, ambitious, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had clawed her way up, but today felt different. A uniformed officer stood by the entrance, arms crossed, eyes scanning her like a predator sizing prey. "Ma'am," he said suddenly, voice clipped sharp. "Step aside. We need to check your bag." Cassandra froze, hand on her designer leather purse. "Is there a problem?" The officer sneered. "Don't get smart. Just comply." Around them, the morning chatter dulled, like the air itself had thickened. Other patrons averted their eyes. Cassandra's pulse raced, blood hammering in her ears. She felt every second stretch, every microsecond a needle of humiliation. "Don't make me call it in," he spat, stepping closer. Her eyes narrowed. "Call what in? That I'm black. That I exist here." He laughed, a cruel bark that echoed off marble walls. "Watch your tone, lady." Hands shoved her against the security desk, the scanner's metallic beep slicing the tension. Cassandra's mind raced. Phone in bag, wallet, ID, the morning news crew waiting for her interview, and she realized with icy certainty, this officer had no idea who she was. The officer's radio crackled. Cassandra's head whipped toward it. The words that spilled out made her stomach drop. And then the cuffs. The line between power and prejudice slammed shut behind her. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and her morning spiraled into accusation, threat, and exposure. Cassandra Moore, black, wealthy, respected, soon-waiting, was being handcuffed in her own city. The officer smiled. The automatic doors opened with a metallic hiss. Cassandra Moore's heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp, rhythmic, like a metronome counting down the seconds of her morning. The lobby was crowded with early risers, bankers, and clients, fluorescent lights harsh against polished surfaces. She adjusted her blazer, the crisp fabric biting against her wrists. She noticed him immediately. A uniformed officer stationed near the entrance, arms crossed, eyes scanning patrons with an intensity that made her pulse tighten. He was young, thick-necked, posture rigid. His gaze settled on her, lingering too long, calculating. "Ma'am," he said, voice sudden, harsh. "Step aside. We need to check your bag." Cassandra froze, fingers brushing her leather purse. "Is there a problem?" "Don't get smart. Just comply." The lobby fell into a muted hush. Other clients averted their eyes, a collective unwillingness to intervene. Cassandra's mind raced. This was not random. He had chosen her. "Don't make me call it in," he barked, stepping closer, tone sharp. Her eyes narrowed. "Call what in? That I'm black. That I exist here." He laughed, cruel and loud, echoing off marble walls. "Watch your tone, lady." Hands shoved her against the security desk. The scanner beeped, cold and mechanical. Cassandra's bag was rifled through, every item examined as though each could be evidence of crime. Her ID, credit cards, phone, carefully packed lunch, all treated as potential contraband. "You've got no idea who I am," she said, voice low but firm, teeth clenched. He smirked, oblivious. "Maybe not. Doesn't matter." Cassandra's heart hammered. Her morning schedule, boardroom, merger documents, media interview, collided violently with this moment of humiliation. Internal counting of seconds, breaths, gestures. Every second stretched into a public spectacle. Nearby, a receptionist pretended to type, eyes flicking nervously. Other patrons whispered, some glancing at their phones, recording or looking away. The weight of systemic injustice pressed in, dense and cold. The officer's radio crackled. Cassandra's head whipped toward it. Words spilled out that made her stomach drop, sending a shiver up her spine. And then the cuffs. Leather and metal closed around her wrists. Cool, clinical, final. Cassandra Moore, a woman poised to command millions, found herself trapped in a loop of prejudice she had anticipated but never imagined this blatant. The officer smiled, teeth showing, confidence swollen. Power misapplied. Authority unchecked. She looked past him at the morning sun spilling through glass panes, harsh and unforgiving. A single thought crystallized. This was not over. Cassandra was guided down a narrow corridor, walls beige and sterile, the fluorescent lights buzzing above in an almost rhythmic taunt. The officer ahead kept a hand on the small of her back, guiding, directing, asserting. Each step echoed against the linoleum, a metronome marking her diminishing autonomy. "Name?" the desk sergeant asked without looking up, flipping through a folder thick with paperwork. "Cassandra Moore," she said, voice measured. He raised an eyebrow, scanning the ID she handed over. "Date of birth?" "January 14th, 1985, she replied, deliberately slow, noting every flicker of judgment in his eyes. "You don't look like—" "Never mind." Cassandra's jaw tightened. She'd heard this before. A lifetime of people underestimating her based on skin color, turning surprise into condescension. She chose silence, letting him stumble over his own assumptions. The officer led her to a holding area, small and windowless, with a row of metal chairs bolted to the floor. The scent of bleach, stale coffee, and nervous sweat lingered. Behind her, the door clanged shut, a metallic punctuation to her new reality. "Sit," the desk sergeant said. She obeyed. Other detainees waited, their expressions weary, wary. Some avoided eye contact. Others studied her, curious about the discrepancy between her calm posture and the chaos she had just endured. Whispers floated through the room, fragmented, speculative. The officer returned with her belongings, placing them on a counter with a deliberate thud. He muttered something to a colleague, words clipped and private. Cassandra caught fragments. "High profile, wealthy. Oh, think it matters." Her mind catalogued everything. The officer's hesitations, the slight shifts in tone, the unspoken racial hierarchy encoded in their interactions. She counted the seconds until the next officer approached, noting the subtle power dynamics, the unacknowledged biases, the patronizing smiles disguised as professionalism. A clerk handed her forms to sign, pen poised in a way that implied authority rather than assistance. "You know how this works, right?" "Yes," she replied curtly, scanning the documents. Each line was a reminder. She was now subject to a system that saw her skin before her competence, her presence before her merits. Minutes stretched into an hour. Cassandra observed, catalogued, internalized. Every dismissive glance, every pause before acknowledgement, was a lesson in systemic prejudice. A younger officer appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking nervously toward the sergeant. "We need her mugshot and fingerprints," he said, voice low. Cassandra's pulse quickened. She stood, careful, deliberate. Her hands shook slightly, but her posture remained controlled. Each motion was a negotiation with a reality she had endured before but never fully experienced at this level of exposure. The officer who had initially detained her lingered at the back, arms crossed, watching, a predator without prey. Cassandra met his gaze, unflinching, noting the flicker of annoyance, the slight narrowing of his eyes as if her calm defiance unsettled him. "Next," the clerk said, nodding toward the photo station. Cassandra stepped forward, the mechanical camera flash breaking the tension in sharp bursts. Each flash a visual indictment of her presence in a system structured to undermine her. After the photos, the inked fingerprints, and the repetitive process of validation, the officer left briefly to file reports. Cassandra remained in the holding area, alone but acutely aware of the isolation imposed not by walls but by institutional hierarchy. She leaned back in the metal chair, hands folded, letting the indignation simmer beneath the surface. Every encounter, every microaggression, every unacknowledged slight had formed a pattern, a map of systemic bias she now navigated firsthand. The murmurs of the other detainees faded. Time became elastic. The outside world continued without interruption. For Cassandra, The arrest was a lens focusing centuries of embedded prejudice into a single, crystalline moment of reckoning. The door opened again, footsteps approaching. Cassandra's eyes met the officer's. His smile was small, predatory, confident. He still did not know who she was. Cassandra sat in the small consultation room, the sterile hum of the courthouse ventilation above her head. Across the table, her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Lauren Jacobs, flipped through her file with precise movements, eyes scanning pages, double-checking facts. "Charges?" Cassandra asked, voice low but steady. "Disorderly conduct, resisting a lawful search, and technically obstruction," Lauren replied, pausing as she looked up. "None of this holds once we present your credentials and the video footage. But they're going to drag it out, push for a plea." Cassandra's fingers drummed against the tabletop, counting beats, steadying herself. "Plea. Standard intimidation," Lauren said. "They want compliance without question. It's subtle, systemic. You already felt it. They'll see your calm, your wealth, maybe even your status as a challenge. They'll test you. See if you buckle." She exhaled, letting the words settle. The officer's presence, his smug authority, and the holding cell's walls replayed in her mind like a loop. The microaggressions, the subtle dismissals, the patronizing smiles. Everything was part of a pattern she had learned to read, dissect, and counteract. A knock on the door drew her attention. A junior clerk stepped in, eyes flicking nervously between Cassandra and Lauren. "The officer, he's in the hallway." Cassandra's gaze sharpened. The hallway was sterile, white, the smell of disinfectant strong. From the cracked door, she caught sight of him leaning casually against the wall, radio clipped to his vest, fingers drumming. Confidence radiated from him, unearned yet assumed. "He has no idea who you are," Lauren said quietly. "And that's an advantage in a sense." Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. Her mind catalogued the situation. The subtle power imbalance, the implicit bias embedded in every gesture, every syllable. The officer's overconfidence, a consequence of systemic training, social reinforcement, and institutional impunity, would be his weakness if leveraged properly. The conversation with Lauren shifted to logistics. Potential witnesses, security footage, timing of arraignment, media implications. Dialogue was dense, strategic, every sentence loaded with implications. Cassandra remained alert, absorbing, questioning. They discussed her prior public appearances, her media profile, the way her image might be misrepresented if the story leaked. The notion that her race alone could distort public perception ignited a tight coil of frustration in her chest. "Document everything," Lauren advised, tapping her pen against the folder. "Every interaction, every slip, every remark. The system punishes silence and rewards exposure." The officer in the hallway shifted, brushing a hand through his hair. Cassandra's eyes locked with his. He grinned, a brief flash of smug certainty. He had no idea the leverage she held. Minutes dragged. The hallway became a theater of psychological warfare. Him assuming dominance, her calculating patience. Every step she took was deliberate, every pause meaningful. Dialogue, observation, and silence combined into a tension-filled rhythm. Finally, the officer disappeared down the corridor. Cassandra exhaled slowly. "They think this is intimidation," she muttered, mostly to herself. Lauren nodded. "It is. But we turn it against them. Carefully. Legally. Strategically." Cassandra leaned back, letting her gaze drift toward the courthouse ceiling. The fluorescent lights, sterile and indifferent, reflected her internal calculation. The ordeal had already begun to imprint itself on her psyche. Public humiliation, systemic disregard, racial bias. It was all part of a larger network she had always known existed abstractly. Now she faced it concretely, personally. Her hands tightened into fists on the table. She would not break. She would not plead. Every procedural delay, every dismissive glance, every condescending remark was a thread she could use to weave accountability. Outside, the courthouse buzzed with ordinary life, indifferent to the social theater unfolding within its walls. Cassandra Moore, black, wealthy, poised, trapped temporarily in legal limbo, prepared to navigate every nuance, every bias, and every hidden advantage the system had revealed. By mid-afternoon, the news cycle had picked up on Cassandra's arrest. Her phone vibrated incessantly. Notifications, texts, messages from assistants, friends, and colleagues. Social media was alive with fragmented narratives, some sympathetic, many dismissive, a few outright hostile. Misrepresentation flourished in the gaps between fact and speculation. Lauren hovered nearby, scrolling through her tablet. "They're calling it a bank disturbance. No mention of who you actually are. Or why you were targeted." Cassandra exhaled, letting the frustration settle behind her eyes. Every headline twisted her identity into something palatable to public prejudice. A wealthy black woman supposedly causing trouble, reduced to an incident, not a person. "You can't control this," Lauren said. "Not yet. But we can shape the narrative, frame it before they do permanent damage." Cassandra leaned back, staring at the fluorescent lights overhead. The officer's smirk, the cuffs, the whispers in the holding area. All of it replayed like a broken loop. She catalogued the details, noting how systemic prejudice amplified in public perception. It wasn't just law enforcement. It was the media, the bystanders, the social expectation that black presence must be questioned, minimized, or vilified. Her phone rang. It was her assistant, voice strained. "Cassandra, the interview. The crew is ready, but they're hesitant. Some producers are worried about backlash. They heard about the arrest." "Not going in," Cassandra said firmly. She let the phone rest, fingers tapping lightly on the leather cover. She had a plan, and exposing injustice required patience and timing. Public sympathy was secondary to factual clarity. Outside the courthouse, passerby reactions varied. A few whispered, some stared, others filmed. The recording of her arrest would eventually surface. Cassandra had seen the patterns before. Footage edited, captions biased, context erased. Her mind calculated preemptive strategies. Which footage to release, which statements to authorize, who would speak on her behalf. Dialogue with staff became urgent, precise. A young reporter slipped into the waiting room, notebook in hand. "Ms. Moore, can you comment?" Cassandra's gaze didn't waver. "Everything you need to know will be made public at the appropriate time. Speculation only harms the truth." The reporter nodded, recognizing the steel behind her calm. Not all journalists appreciated patience. Most wanted sensationalized conflict. Cassandra understood the landscape, the subtle ways her race shaped expectations, reactions, and assumptions. Lauren added quietly, "The social media thread, look at it. Even subtle likes and retweets reveal bias. People interpret your identity through prejudice first, facts second. This is systemic, not isolated." Cassandra scrolled through feeds, noting patterns. Comments from accounts with anonymous handles, coded language praising or condemning the officer, assumptions about her behavior. Even allies sometimes misread intent, seeing her restraint as compliance rather than strategy. "They're framing the story," Cassandra said. Her voice was tight, precise. "Officers' actions become the headline, mine the footnote. People read what they expect to see." Clerk peeked through the door. "The officer's here again. Wants to check on progress." Cassandra's pulse sharpened. She turned to see him in the hallway. Casual posture, radio clipped, authority unchallenged. His confidence was brittle. It hadn't been tested yet. Dialogue, body language, all pointed to his assumption that public visibility equaled power. Lauren murmured, "We'll let him think that for now. Every interaction counts. Document it." The officer glanced inside, saw Cassandra at ease despite the chaos. He misread calm for weakness. She met his eyes briefly, letting him see recognition, calculation, awareness. Then she returned to her phone, composed. Outside, the courthouse buzzed, indifferent. The media, social media, and public opinion were spinning their narratives. Cassandra understood that exposure and misrepresentation were tools of systemic control, tools she would use to reclaim authority, but with precision and patience. By late afternoon, her team had crafted statements, prepped verified footage, and identified key points for public release. Dialogue among them was brisk, strategy-focused, loaded with terminology of leverage, accountability, and timing. Cassandra listened, instructed, and adjusted. She knew the officer's ignorance of her status was temporary. When revealed, it would be seismic. For now, patience was her weapon. Observation, dialogue, and calculated restraint would dictate the unfolding drama. Public perception could be influenced, injustice documented, power inverted, but only if approached with methodical discipline. The day ended with Cassandra still inside the courthouse, a calculated observer in a system that had tried to render her powerless. Side news channels buzzed. Social media hummed. The officer remained unaware of the storm building beneath Cassandra's composed exterior. Cassandra was led into a small interrogation room, the kind designed to make anyone feel exposed. Pale walls, a single table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. The officer entered behind her, posture casual, hands on his belt. Confidence radiated from him, unearned yet assumed. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Cassandra complied, keeping her movements deliberate, measured. She noted the faint smirk tugging at his lips, the assumption of control, authority unchecked. "You know why you're here," he said, tone sharp, attempting dominance. "I know exactly why I'm here," she replied, voice steady, tight with suppressed anger. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, face inches from hers. "I don't get it. Why resist a simple procedure? You should be cooperative." Cassandra's jaw tightened. Resist? Or demand to be treated like a human being? The officer blinked, momentarily thrown. He recovered quickly, smirking again. "Humans follow rules. You made a scene. We followed protocol." Protocol. Cassandra catalogued the word carefully. It was both shield and weapon for systemic injustice. Every line he spoke reinforced the hierarchy he assumed she acknowledged. She let the silence stretch, watching for cracks in his confidence. "Let's get this straight," he said finally. "You're wealthy, you're educated, but when it comes down to authority, you're just another citizen." His lips curved into a cruel grin. "Right." Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "Citizen. Full stop. And a person deserving of dignity. Something you seem unfamiliar with." The officer's fingers drummed against the tabletop. "Dignity. You think money or status buys respect?" "Yes. And patience. Observation. Knowledge of the law. Awareness of systems. All of which I have. All of which you clearly underestimate." Her voice remained calm, cold, precise. He leaned back slightly, dismissive. "You're smart. Maybe too smart for your own good." Cassandra noted the subtle arrogance in his words, the unchallenged power he wielded under systemic protection. She responded not with anger, but with silence. Observation, calculation. The room seemed to shrink with tension, every gesture amplified, every glance loaded with unspoken consequences. Minutes passed, dialogue punctuated with brief pauses. He attempted to intimidate, to unsettle, to provoke admission or apology. Cassandra countered with measured questions, exposing contradictions, questioning logic, and documenting every verbal maneuver internally. At one point he shifted, leaning closer, voice dropping. "You're not just anyone, are you? There's something notable about you." Cassandra smiled faintly, the tiniest movement. "Notable, perhaps, but you still don't know what that means." The officer's brow furrowed. "Meaning? I own the bank you tried to detain me from this morning," she said, crisp and deliberate. Her words hung in the air, sharp as glass. For a heartbeat he froze. Then his expression twisted from smugness to disbelief, eyes widening. His carefully constructed confidence crumbled under the revelation. His authority suddenly fragile. Cassandra leaned back, unshackled by his shock. The room's tension shifted. Power rebalanced silently, invisibly but palpably. She observed, absorbing the subtle shifts in posture, gaze, and micro-expression. He had assumed dominance, authority unchecked. She exposed his ignorance. "Internal affairs will be very interested in this," she continued, voice firm, composed. "Your conduct, your assumptions, your bias. It's all documented now. Every action, every word." The officer stammered, attempting to recover, but words faltered, meaningless gestures replacing strategic ones. Cassandra remained still, eyes sharp, aware of the power inversion. Lauren's earlier advice echoed. Document, observe, leverage. The officer had given her both a record and a demonstration of systemic weakness. She would use it to reclaim narrative control, influence legal proceedings, and ensure accountability. Minutes later, the officer stepped back, visibly shaken, muttering about reports and procedure. Cassandra watched him leave, recognizing the thin veneer of authority stripped away by her revelation. Dialogue had been her tool, observation her armor. Left alone, Cassandra exhaled, letting tension flow out. The ordeal had been psychologically taxing, exposing layers of systemic prejudice and human arrogance. She catalogued every word, every gesture, knowing each would serve as evidence in the coming days. In the silence, she allowed herself a brief reflection. Humiliation had been temporary. Preparation, knowledge, and strategy provided lasting power. The officer had underestimated her. The system had underestimated her. The office was small, fluorescent lights harsh against polished surfaces. Cassandra sat across from the officer, her posture composed, hands folded neatly on the table. Every inch of her presence radiated calm authority. He shifted in his chair, confident still, though an undercurrent of doubt had begun to show in his narrowed eyes. "Let's be clear," he said, voice tight but trying for control. "You're facing charges. I think we need clarity first," Cassandra interrupted, voice steady, deliberate. "You've made assumptions about me, my presence, my intent. Perhaps it's time you understood the full context." He raised an eyebrow, lips curling into a smirk. "Context. You think it matters?" "Yes," she said. Her tone was flat, controlled, each word a scalpel. "Because context reveals truth, and truth matters far more than authority unchecked." He leaned back, unconsciously crossing his arms, attempting to regain the dominance he believed he held. Cassandra noted the subtle shift, micro-expressions betraying his discomfort, hesitation in his gestures. Dialogue, she realized, had begun to tip the balance of power. "Go on," he said, with a mixture of challenge and curiosity. Cassandra met his gaze directly. "I own the bank you tried to detain me from this morning." The words hung in the air, sharp and crystalline. For a heartbeat, silence. Then his expression faltered, disbelief flickering across his features. Mouth opening and closing without sound, eyes widening. Authority previously assumed now crumbled visibly. "You, what?" he finally stammered, voice cracking. "Not just a client. Not just an executive. The owner. The person responsible for the merger, the oversight, the security policies. That bank, every branch, every account. You've been trespassing in my domain under false assumptions," Cassandra said, calm but precise. Every syllable delivered with unyielding control. He recoiled slightly, shifting in his seat. Confidence faltered. The smirk vanished. The power dynamics inverted. She watched keenly as subtle panic replaced arrogance. You can't." "I can and I will," Cassandra replied evenly. "Your conduct, bias, and assumptions are documented. Internal affairs has been notified. Every word, every act, every decision will be scrutinized. You are accountable. That's the truth you've ignored until now." The officer's hands trembled slightly as he gestured, searching for words. He had entered the day certain of dominance, authority unquestioned. Now he faced the human consequences of prejudgment. The realization struck that systemic privilege, when untested, can be fragile, even brittle. Cassandra continued, her voice unwavering. Public perception is already shaping in our favor. Video footage, witness statements, and legal counsel all support the truth. Your actions will not go unexamined, and your presumption of power will be exposed. He swallowed, eyes darting toward the door, as though escape could restore his collapsed authority. It would not. Her lawyer, Lauren, entered quietly, placing a hand on Cassandra's shoulder. He's beginning to understand. The reports, the documentation, it all points toward accountability. Maintain composure, remain factual. We control the narrative now. Cassandra nodded, a faint, satisfied curve of her lips. Her composure was deliberate. She had weaponized calm, observation, and strategic revelation. Authority had been reclaimed, now grounded in truth rather than assumption. The officer stammered, trying to assert something, anything. I didn't. You underestimated me, Cassandra said, voice clipped, factual. And that was your error. Everything else, your assumptions, your prejudice, will be addressed formally. He sat in stunned silence, every gesture betraying the collapse of assumed power. Cassandra remained still, eyes steady, documenting in her mind the micro-expressions, the tremor in his voice, the faltering gestures. Every detail would serve as evidence. Every silence, as revealing as words. Finally he slumped back, defeated. Cassandra had not raised her voice. She had not threatened. She had revealed truth, and it had sufficed. The officer's hubris had collided with reality, and he had no mechanism to recover. Lauren spoke quietly, eyes focused. Internal affairs will ensure accountability. The system will respond, finally. Cassandra leaned back, the weight of the morning pressing slightly, tempered by clarity. Justice was not instantaneous, nor did it erase trauma, but it was in motion. The officer's ignorance of her status had been temporary. Knowledge, strategy, and composure had ensured that power, previously misapplied, would now face consequence. The door closed behind the officer as he left. Silent now, diminished. Cassandra exhaled, letting tension ease, cataloging every detail for the record. The reveal had been precise, surgical, and inevitable in its consequences. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the microcosm of justice unfolding within four sterile walls. Cassandra had demonstrated that authority grounded in assumption collapses under scrutiny, and that calm, precise revelation could invert systemic imbalance without a single act of vengeance. The following morning, news crews swarmed outside the courthouse and bank headquarters alike. Social media amplified every verified clip. Cassandra's calm defiance, the officer's stunned reactions, the documented abuse of authority. Headlines shifted from speculation to accountability. Bank CEO arrested under false pretenses became Bank CEO exposes officer's bias. Inside the bank, Cassandra held a briefing with her executive team. Dialogue was terse, precise, focused on strategy. Release verified footage only, she instructed. No speculation. No exaggeration. Facts first. Narrative control is key. Her assistants nodded, fingers already flying across keyboards. Every statement, every post, every media interaction had to reinforce the truth while limiting misinterpretation. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs conducted interviews and reviewed footage. Officers, once certain of immunity, were suddenly scrutinized. Colleagues whispered about the incident, some defending the officer, others recognizing the gravity of procedural misconduct. Cassandra's careful observation noted microshifts in hierarchy. Authority questioned, reputation unstable, social and professional consequences imminent. At the courthouse, the officer was confronted by IA investigators. Dialogue captured both disbelief and defensiveness. He attempted justification, citing protocol, procedure, and assumed compliance. Cassandra's revelation had exposed the dissonance between authority as performed and authority as legitimate. Micro-expressions betrayed guilt, Gestures betrayed the collapse of assumed control. Public perception shifted rapidly. Social media engagement surged. Traditional outlets adjusted headlines. Interviews with legal analysts emphasized systemic bias, misapplication of authority, and the accountability that could follow. Every narrative thread contributed to the unraveling of a false hierarchy. Cassandra observed all remotely, eyes scanning updates, ears attuned to every interview snippet. Her composure remained intact. Dialogue with her team was strategic, unemotional. Each decision calibrated to maintain control, ensure fairness, and preserve dignity. Patience, documentation, and observation. The weapons she had wielded were now proving effective. By late afternoon, the officer was officially suspended pending further investigation. Colleagues whispered, some avoiding eye contact, others seeking to distance themselves. The structural veneer of protection had eroded. Public scrutiny, documentation, and Cassandra's strategic actions combined to ensure that institutional bias would face tangible consequence. Meanwhile, Cassandra met with a small group of journalists inside a private conference room. Questions were pointed. Attempts at sensationalism anticipated and neutralized. Dialogue was controlled. Facts emphasized, narrative clarified. She articulated not only her personal experience but also broader patterns of racial prejudice, demonstrating systemic issues without sensationalism. Her team continued releasing verified statements, emphasizing accountability over vengeance. Every clip, every post, every interview reinforced the inversion of power, highlighting systemic failures while demonstrating personal resilience. By evening, headlines reflected clarity. Injustice documented, authority misapplied, accountability in progress. Dialogue from the officer's colleagues, from IA, and from media analysts underscored systemic reflection, public exposure, and impending professional consequences. Cassandra reflected privately on the subtle victories and the emotional toll. Every step had required vigilance, patience, and precision. Authority had been misapplied, assumptions had been weaponized, and systemic bias had manifested in concrete consequences. Through documentation, strategy, and precise revelation, she had reclaimed narrative and moral authority. The day closed with a quiet but significant shift. A once untouchable officer was publicly diminished, institutional procedures under scrutiny, systemic bias exposed. Cassandra had enforced accountability not through confrontation alone, but through meticulous strategy, calm observation, and controlled revelation. The following morning, news crews swarmed outside the courthouse and bank headquarters alike. Social media amplified every verified clip. Cassandra's calm defiance, the officer's stunned reactions, the documented abuse of authority. Headlines shifted from speculation to accountability. Bank CEO arrested under false pretenses became Bank CEO exposes officer's bias. Inside the bank, Cassandra held a briefing with her executive team. Dialogue was terse, precise, focused on strategy. Release verified footage only, she instructed. No speculation. No exaggeration. Facts first. Narrative control is key. Her assistants nodded, fingers already flying across keyboards. Every statement, every post, every media interaction had to reinforce the truth while limiting misinterpretation. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs conducted interviews and reviewed footage. Officers, once certain of immunity, were suddenly scrutinized. Colleagues whispered about the incident, some defending the officer, others recognizing the gravity of procedural misconduct. Cassandra's careful observation noted microshifts in hierarchy. Authority questioned, reputation unstable, social and professional consequences imminent. At the courthouse, the officer was confronted by IA investigators. Dialogue captured both disbelief and defensiveness. He attempted justification, citing protocol, procedure, and assumed compliance. Cassandra's revelation had exposed the dissonance between authority as performed and authority as legitimate. Micro-expressions betrayed guilt. Gestures betrayed the collapse of assumed control. Public perception shifted rapidly. Social media engagement surged. Traditional outlets adjusted headlines. Interviews with legal analysts emphasized systemic bias, misapplication of authority, and the accountability that could follow. Every narrative thread contributed to the unraveling of a false hierarchy. Cassandra observed all remotely, eyes scanning updates, ears attuned to every interview snippet. Her composure remained intact. Dialogue with her team was strategic, unemotional. Each decision calibrated to maintain control, ensure fairness, and preserve dignity. Patience, documentation, and observation. The weapons she had wielded were now proving effective. By late afternoon, the officer was officially suspended pending further investigation. Colleagues whispered, some avoiding eye contact, others seeking to distance themselves. The structural veneer of protection had eroded. Public scrutiny, documentation, and Cassandra's strategic actions combined to ensure that institutional bias would face tangible consequence. Meanwhile, Cassandra met with a small group of journalists inside a private conference room. Questions were pointed. Attempts at sensationalism anticipated and neutralized. Dialogue was controlled. Facts emphasized, narrative clarified. She articulated not only her personal experience but also broader patterns of racial prejudice, demonstrating systemic issues without sensationalism. Her team continued releasing verified statements, emphasizing accountability over vengeance. Every clip, every post, every interview reinforced the inversion of power, highlighting systemic failures while demonstrating personal resilience. By evening, headlines reflected clarity. Injustice documented, authority misapplied, accountability in progress. Dialogue from the officer's colleagues, from IA, and from media analysts underscored systemic reflection, public exposure, and impending professional consequences. Cassandra reflected privately on the subtle victories and the emotional toll. Every step had required vigilance, patience, and precision. Authority had been misapplied, assumptions had been weaponized, and systemic bias had manifested in concrete consequences. Through documentation, strategy, and precise revelation, she had reclaimed narrative and moral authority. The day closed with a quiet but significant shift. A once untouchable officer was publicly diminished, institutional procedures under scrutiny, systemic bias exposed. Cassandra had enforced accountability not through confrontation alone, but through meticulous strategy, calm observation, and controlled revelation.